Good morning to the world, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about why sport matters so much. And if you're a parent watching this today, this might be your most important presentation for the whole of 2021. Why do I say that? Simply because over the past 27 years, I was just doing some counting. I've been working with elite athletes and also working with corporate executives and also people across different domains, and also more importantly, people across different age groups, from preschoolers all the way to elite performers. And one of the things that I noticed is that people who have done sport seem to behave and think very differently. Now, nothing against all the other domains outside of sport, like performing arts and clubs and societies in school for children when they're in school. We're not comparing those things. But what is important is that the world has changed so much during this pandemic, especially. And our children are going through difficult times, just like we are as adults. And so the challenge right now is, how do we prepare them for the world out there? And I firmly believe that sport is one simple but important way for us to prepare them. Research shows that you cannot build resilience, or now we use the word mental toughness, and even adaptability skills just purely by learning it in a workshop or a webinar like this. But rather, mental toughness and resilience can only be developed via experience. But then the question is, do we make them fail so that on purpose, therefore they will then build themselves up? That's a bit of a risk, isn't it? So parents, today's session is about how do we create an environment that will still allow them to learn to fail and then pick themselves up so that they can then rise up and be able to acquire and hone those mental toughness skills that are so crucial for success in life. Today's presentation, three major topics. One is the importance of junior sport and academic grades and beyond. And we'll look at actually research done on working adults. The second one is on the kind of sports that your child should play. And we've kind of categorized it in different types so that it helps you understand the psychological demands that are placed upon the children. And therefore, they are important in the early years for them to be able to widen up the exposure and be able to use that experience to help themselves. And then last but not least, we'll talk a little bit about the mental toughness profile junior, where all of you will have a chance to profile your child by you answering some important questions that asks you about their mental toughness qualities. Okay, so without further ado, let me start. So again, we're looking at research globally and also locally. And so you will see in my slide one study that was very important for us. And in research, we call these meta-analytic studies. These are studies that look at other studies that focus on one particular topic or area. And so this study looked at physical activity, and in some cases, obviously, sport and exercise. And they found that children who exercise, they did better academically because their brains were better developed. And also at the same time, because of that, it helped them have better classroom behaviors, meaning they were less problematic to their teachers in school. So again, this is interesting in the sense that they don't just look at one study, they look at several studies. And then they found that those are some of the positive qualities of sport. Why? Because in sport, you have to control the physical movements and also control your emotions as you play. So that way, kids have the opportunity to practice some of these skills. Another study, which I like, because they looked at, guess what? Medical students and even physicians in the medical community, in hospitals and the like. And they found that, based on their research, they found that medical students and medical professionals like the physicians actually use a lot of the skills they picked up in sport. Because in sport, there is always this thing about ambiguity and uncertainty. I remember I used to do Taekwondo and Aikido. Aikido is a Japanese martial art. And in martial arts, you don't know what your opponent's gonna attack you with. So because of that, I had to learn to deal with the ambiguity during that sparring session. So not just in martial arts, but any other sport, do you think the opponent will tell you what the next move or gameplay will be? Of course they won't. So your child will have to learn how to manage the ambiguity because of the fact that sport forces them to do that. Whereas in school, we are taught, there's a certain answer to the way the questions are kind of structured because we are testing to see whether the syllabus has been covered. And so because of that, it is quite structured. It is quite set in some form or fashion. So studying in terms of academics is important for knowledge, and analytical skills, but it doesn't help us, our children especially, to be able to handle the ambiguity and the uncertainty in the area of sport. So that's another reason why this study showed that these medical professionals and even undergrads, because of their experience in sport, when they were younger, it helped them later in life. So here's the point too. What we're doing now is investing in the child's future. And what we're doing for the younger years, especially preschoolers, primary school students especially, and maybe to some extent the lower secondary, but I'm focusing more on the preschoolers and the primary school kids. So about 12, 13 years old, that's from when they go to school, 3 years old, all the way right up to, early teens, like say, for example, 13 or 14. Okay, that's the important period that we want the kids to expose themselves to sports so that they learn to fail. But then you probably say, yeah, these are all, overseas studies, and how does it relate to us? Guess what? Because of that question, we wanted to do something more local. And so there are a couple of studies we did locally and just want to show you what they are. And one study we did with secondary school students, all girls, all boys school. We studied the whole cohorts. And this is what we found in this stat. You will look at this chart and you will see that the students who did sport were almost 2 times mentally tougher than the students who did not do sport. Now, again, I say again, it doesn't mean that doing clubs and societies in school is bad. No, it's not that. There are other good things that they can learn from, leadership skills and things like that. But we're just talking about mental toughness and resilience, right? So that's one key thing that I found really, really important for us to note, that the students who played sport were mentally tougher because of the fact that they had to deal with failures. Every time you compete, there's an opportunity for you to fail and make mistakes, and your ego is at stake. And also within the group that played sport, we asked them, what sport do you play? Do you play team sports or do you play non-team sports, which is basically individual type sports, like bowling or shooting and things like that. Whereas team sport is quite clear, soccer or football, volleyball, netball, and the like, or rugby. Yeah. So we found that there was no statistical difference between groups that played team sports and non-team sports, which means to say it doesn't matter what sport your kid plays. Another study is that we looked at academic grades also and stress. So we found that students who were mentally tougher had less stress, right? Because they used mental toughness as a coping resource. And also those who were mentally tougher statistically in this study did better academically. Now, I have to admit that the score of the correlation, if you see the what we call the correlation, which is the relationship, between the two variables, is only 0.25, which to most people it's quite a small gradient, which is the relationship between the two. But I have to also tell you this, that this particular study actually very smart students from an international baccalaureate or IB school in Singapore. And they are rated one of the best in the world. They, in fact, top majority of the top few positions every year when the IB exam results come out. You can probably guess what school that is, those of us who are living in Singapore. But that aside, I want to just emphasize that this particular group were very smart students. And yet, within that smart batch that we were looking at in that cohort, we also found that, interestingly, we could differentiate between the ones who did better academically amongst themselves and the ones who did not. And the factor that differentiated that was mental toughness. Okay, so there you go. Mental toughness that has some relationship with what we call academic grades. Okay, so and when we went higher, we went to undergrad level, and then we looked at students who were studying at the universities. We also found a very similar thing. We found that the undergrads who were mentally tougher had lower test anxiety a month or two before the exams. And then getting to older people now, and this is one of my favorite charts, it actually replicates what we found just now with the secondary school students. The correlation just now was 0.65. This one that I'm showing you now is 0.66, right? So if I may just highlight to you where this is, you will see that the correlation for working adults is 0.66. If you notice the other slide earlier, it was 0.65, which means to say the correlation or the relationship between mental toughness and stress were very, very close in terms of relationship. In fact, there was another study done by one of my associates, and they found also very similar things, that people who were mentally tougher had less stress. And the other last one is this, which also highlights another point, and that is this: as you get older, your mental toughness increases, which makes sense because in Asia, we will always say, an older person will always tell someone younger, I've eaten more salt than you have eaten rice, to a younger person. And that means that I've gone through many of life's challenges. And so the group that we studied were people across the whole of Singapore. We went to do some corporate training, and then we studied and surveyed them. And then we found that the age range was about 18 to about 55 years old. So that's quite a wide range of people. And also we saw that there was this relationship which was significant, that as you get older, you get stronger mentally. Again, it's because of the exposure. But my major problem with this is this: we cannot wait till our children are 55 years old, which is, by the way, that's my age, that they are then going to be able to benefit from the mental toughness that they gain. That's way too late. Okay, so our key now is to ramp up this curve, as I've just drawn this, so that we teach them early on, as early as possible, so that they get opportunities to learn to pick up mental toughness skills and competencies. So I hope that makes sense to you logically, that we need to expose our kids. So in summary, meta-analytic studies show that long-term sport physical activity improves many aspects in children's cognitive performance, classroom behavior, and academic performance. And this is what every teacher and even parent would like to see in their children, isn't it? So therefore, that is a good thing for us. Number two, students who do competitive sport are mentally tougher, no matter what sport they play, against those who did not play sport. And the students who are mentally tough experience less stress and were better academically. And undergrads with higher mental toughness have lower test anxiety. So you can see it doesn't matter at what age, as long as you need to perform under pressure and stress as a student and even as a working adult, you can benefit from it. And of course, the last one is, again, working adults also experience the same phenomenon. They experience less stress. They were able to manage the stressful situations in their lives, and they can, of course, improve as they go through life, but that's the risk. Okay, we don't want that to happen. Okay, so therefore, that particular aspect of that presentation basically highlight to you that mental toughness is important, and that at the end of the day, sport is a great way for our kids to learn to fail, for our kids to learn to experiment also, certain skills that help them manage their stressful lives. So that way, when they go out to work, they are way more ready than their peers who don't play sport. So the question next is, all right, I'm convinced, right? What sport do I play now? And I'm going to share with you the scientific approach on how you could structure the exposure to your kids. Now, you don't necessarily have to coach them, of course, or you can always work with multi-sport coaches who are trained to be able to handle and train and prepare them for those sporting events. All right. So, but let me first say this. A lot of parents have this wrong, in fact, I may use the word wrong notion that if I want my child to be an Olympic champion, they should play that sport till when they're born, all the way until they try to achieve some level of success and become the Olympian that you aspire them to be. Guess what? The studies are very, very clear. That counter to what most people think. Olympians and world champions don't specialize in their early years. They do in their late teens. So this particular study, look at 83 international medalists. So they had to be medalists, right? And then they compared equivalent people in other sports, similar sports, who were non-medalists. But they were of the same sport, they were of the same or similar age, and of course the same gender. And when they compared these two groups, amazingly, they found that the ones who won medals played other sports before they even kind of specialized. Yeah. So therefore, they had that wider exposure to this particular mental quality that we're talking about. That's what differentiates. Because when you go for competition, your ego's on the line, your self-image, your self-esteem, everything is on the line. And therefore, you have no choice because the spotlight's on you. When you're in the stadium, everybody knows when you make that mistake in competition, and it's stressful. For a student, you're sitting in the exam hall, no one's looking at you. Yeah, you're feeling stressed about the test or exam, you can't answer a question. Well, yeah, it's stressful, no doubt. But you compare that with someone who is on the field and being watched by the rest of the world. How stressful is that? And if you make a mistake, people will boo you, or they might even cheer because they're from the opposite side. That's really tough. How do you handle that? Again, I say to you, sport is a great way for kids to learn how to handle those things. Now, there's one particular person, some of you may or may not have picked up in the news lately. This happened just about a week ago. And her name is Emma Raducanu. Yeah. She's a UK person. And she said, her coach said, he said, from my perspective, one of the best things with Emma is that she was exposed to a lot of sports from a young age and didn't go too specific into tennis straight away. I see that on court. When she's learning a new skill or trying something a little bit different, she has the ability and coordination to pick things up very quickly, even if it's quite a big technical change. So you need that physical competency and adaptability, and that can be picked up through multiple sports. And of course, the ability to grind it through and to persevere and to have that resilience and mental toughness to be able to take on a little bit of knocks here and there, mistakes here and there, and even failure. And so I submit to you, parents, that at the end of the day, the champions do it differently. Now, you even see in this little chart here, Roger Federer is also another perfect example. Roger Federer is another world-class athlete. He's top 3 in the world. In fact, he was top ranked for a while. But the point is that he also did not specialize until in his late teens. So the key here is that, yes, majority of sports out there benefit from multi-sports exposure because you're teaching the kids many other qualities that are important for their school and also for other sports in the future, so there are double benefits. There's a bit of a caveat. Like people always cite, who? Tiger Woods. They always say, hey, Tiger Woods was able to, become, a prodigy. And at the age of 5 or 6, he started golf. And then, when he was a young kid, he was able to win tournaments and many years thereafter. But a lot of people don't understand is that when you compare tennis with golf, you can specialize in a way because it is a static sport, it's a closed skill sport. Whereas tennis is an open dynamic sport. So therefore, there are a lot more combinations and a lot more ambiguities and uncertainties in the game of tennis. That's why it's a lot more difficult to play these types of sports because of the dynamism involved in those sports. But again, we don't know what our child's going to be when they grow up for their careers. We can only prepare them in their early years. And that's the reason why we want to expose them to sport. So when we use this model called the LTAD model, or the long-term athlete development model, and this is what we see. We see that children in their early years ideally should expose themselves to 12 to 16 sports. You're saying, what? How do you get so many? Yeah, well, we do that in some of our preschools that we do training for. Each year they play 8 sports. 2 years they play 16 sports, minus swimming and sailing maybe, and rock climbing. Primary school 6 to 8, which they do probably in PE. And then as they go to secondary school, they should still play a little bit, but they start to narrow down. And then when they want to really focus and have passion for that sport, that's where they can start to specialize fully. Because by that time, all those other competencies in terms of their physical abilities, like Emma, she's playing world-class level. She won the US, I forgot to mention, what did she win? She won the US Tennis Open just a week ago. And so you specialize only when you more or less know what you like. But a lot of times parents dictate the sports their kids play. And you may have some bias, parents, let's be honest, you have some bias too. Because you had certain positive experiences in some sport and less in others, and you are more, likely to get your kid to specialize in a sport that you think are good for them. Or here's what happens when the country wins a medal in a sport. It doesn't matter which country you belong to. Guess what? Everybody wants to play that sport, and everybody wants to be Olympic champion. Wrong idea. Just because that person became an Olympic champion doesn't mean your child will be. Because the studies are also very clear. It doesn't happen that way. You can only know when you go through it and over the different years, and then you let the child decide. You let your child decide. But the only way they can decide is they are given a buffet spread of sports. Because if you don't do that, they won't know what they're good at. And they cannot compare for themselves what sport's good for them. So you have to widen up the scope, let them try, and they find, nah, not so interested, never mind, let's try something else. And then you just do that. But that's costly. So one strategy is to specifically in the early years, in preschool and primary school level, go for those what we call multi-sports academies, where they actually widen up the scope for the kids and they get the kids to play different types of sports. So these are the ways how we do this. So first of all, different types of sports have got different demands on the child, partly because of the psychological demands that every sport provides. So, but notice that some sports have a bit of an overlap. So we have routine sports, and we have sports, obviously most sports actually require tactics and strategy. Some more for race planning. Implement control, meaning you have to work with a racket or a club or a stick, like a hockey stick or floorball stick, and teamwork. Because there's some interaction between you and the parties involved in the team. So there are 5 types of sports. Notice the 5 types of sports. Let me just change to a different color so you can see the difference. So we have close skill sports that are precision-based and routine-based. Okay, so that's one. Next, we have combat sports, where you have to do patterns like kata in karate, pomse in taekwondo. And then you have the sparring part. Now, some of the sports obviously repeat themselves, others not so. Then you have racing sports, quite clear. Then you have racket sports, also quite clear, because racket sports, you have to have a racket, otherwise it's not a racket sport. And then you have your team sport, right? And that's quite clear also what team sports are, where there are multiple players all at the same time. There you go. Now, for every sport or type of sport, you will see that there are some ticks here and there, and then there are also those that are highlighted in kind of like orange, yellow, gold, light gold. And that's because the emphasis is for that particular sport. So if you just kind of like look across in this matrix, you will see that it makes sense. And you don't need a scientist to tell you that. Although I am. Okay, so here you see the major points, the one with two ticks, and then the minor ones, so to speak, in the single ticks. Now, of course, you can argue against, this one's more, that one's less. Fair enough. But I mean, look at it from a big picture perspective. That's what we're asking you to do. When you look at all these sports, now you can see why I cannot get my child to only specialize in what? Golf? Well, racket sports in a sense, no. Racket sports is also a bit of like golf or bowling, because it's a pre-performance routine. Yeah. Although there's a little bit of racket too involved in terms of those sports. But the point is, it is there. Okay. And in some of those sports in particular, you have teamwork. Why? Because you can play as a team, there's team events, and sometimes your individual scores add up with your teammates' scores to get you your overall scores. Make sense? Yeah. So there you go. These are some of the sports that you need to pay attention to, but don't worry about the specific sports, but rather the category of sport is what we're looking at. Okay. The psychological demands are because of the way the sport rules are being played out. Okay. So that's the reason why we want our kids to expose themselves to these sports. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. And the other one, next slide, is mental toughness or resilience, right? And you will see here that, again, in a similar fashion, that you have the different types of sports, the 5 types. So you notice the different colored sports. And all of them require mental toughness because you have to deal with competition, pressure, and stress. So that's good news, right? Sport requires all the mental toughness skills. I laugh because it's like, then you say, why do you even need a chart? Yeah, well, we need the chart because some elements in that sport are more important in that area. Now, again, it's relative, okay? So all are important, it's just some are more important than others. So you notice if you just look across, all the different types of sports put slightly different demands on the mental toughness skills or adaptability skills of the child. So by exposing them to multiple sports when they're young, you are also giving them opportunities to acquire these mental toughness skills, right? And notice in some sports, like sparring sports, you have to have more confidence because you're going to get whacked. And trust me, I've done martial arts for the longest time, and it's confidence is so important. Now, not to say that other sports you don't need confidence. Don't get me wrong. Every sport here has a tick, right? It's just that which one has got 3 ticks and which one has got 2 and which one has got 1. Racket sports require a lot of focus because of the racket or club that you have to deal with, and also coping with a lot of dynamism, a lot of uncertainty because your opponent can throw anything at you. And then lastly, team sports require copability because you have to manage a lot of things and uncertainty, and also more important, cohesion and teamwork. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, you see, again, the wider your scope in terms of exposure to different sports, that is where your child will learn all these skills that just attending a workshop like this even doesn't help. Okay, so what's wrong with junior sport today? Very simple. It's because we're getting our kids to specialize too early. So the type of sports they should play is that we use this concept of the LTAD approach, long-term athlete development approach. We want to make sure they have early diversification at preschool and primary school level, because then they have as many sports to play with. And then also from there, they get to choose a little bit more and narrow focus a little bit more. And then when they go to secondary school and above, they can start to narrow some more and more and more. By the time they're in their late teens, they can more or less start to specialize. And they can still play other sports to just kind of hone their mind-body connection, and also their fitness level, their agility level, and also their mental toughness level and adaptability skills. Okay, and so the key are the 5 types of sports. Yeah, so do you remember the 5 types of sports? So they got the closed skill sports where it's kind of closed, it doesn't change very much, it's more routine based. Next we have the racing sports where it's about running, cycling, biking, swimming, right? Those are racing sports. Then you have the team sports, Team sports are clearly, rugby, netball, hockey. And then you have your racket sports. So anything to do with the racket, like tennis, table tennis, badminton, and a little bit of combination of racket and team sport would be floorball, hockey. And then lastly, you have combat sport. Combat sport is the sparring part. But again, for young kids, we don't do that. But there are some schools, like there's one very good school, they call Sportzilla. They actually expose kids in their taekwondo classes to even multi-sports within their taekwondo training. So I really like the way and the approach they take. And that gives their kids the opportunities to try different things and develop other skills that just purely learning taekwondo alone is not, going to develop fully the child's exposure. So there are skill programs and courses or camps. So like during the school holidays, after the exams are over, it's good for your child to be exposed to multiple sports. There are some camps out there, all right? So because of that, that's where your child can get to decide what sport they want to do. And also as part of our work, we actually assess the child's fundamental movement skills, especially for preschoolers and lower primary school, because that's an important developmental stage. So for us, we assess the child on their fundamental skills. We compare them against global norms. That means what children their age are able to do. And then from there, we change the curriculum. We add new sports that the child may have certain maybe weaknesses in, and the idea is not to specialize way too early. In fact, people say, hey, shouldn't this be used for talent identification? I say, no, this should actually be talent development. I'm not in a rush to try to develop an Olympic champion now. I'm investing in them to ensure they're wider in their scope. All right, so please work with SAFRA. I believe SAFRA will have something coming up at the end of the year. So check us out, and we'll be working with SAFRA in terms of helping parents to understand their kids' skills, competencies in their different sports. And then that's where the kids will have your exposure and the experience to be able to kind of do better as they go through life. And then next year, we will be launching this for parents and even coaches, but coaches will have a slightly different app because they need it for their work. But parents will be able to assess the fundamental movement skills, so that with that, you'll be able to identify, the sports that the child needs to develop, especially in the areas that they're not so strong in, and not really to just focus on one sport. Remember, there's also studies to show that specializing or doing well in one sport when they're young is no guarantee that they will succeed in that particular same sport later down in life. So we're not in a hurry to get them to specialize until when they're after or around late secondary school level. That's about 15, 16 years old. Okay, so check us out and follow us. We will update you as we move along. In fact, yesterday we were looking at our AI system and we're able to pick up a couple of things and assess children. So we're quite excited, and this we understand is the first of its kind in the world. So therefore, this will help you be able to assess your child's physical competencies immediately without much hassle, all right? Because it's all using AI to be able to assess. And last but not least, we're gonna want to thank you for your time and for you to attending today's session. As a giveaway, we want to help you understand your child's mental toughness quality, which also tells you that if their scores are not kind of in the 70 range, then it is hopeful that you expose them to some sports, okay? And remember, it doesn't matter what sport they play, just get them to play something. But ideally, not focus on one sport, but several sports, so that the kids have got opportunities to be able to pick up some of these skills, mental skills, adaptability skills, resilience skills, or mental toughness skills, we call it, in their exposure. Because remember, in every competition, there's only one winner. So you might be the first runner-up, second runner-up. Those are nice titles for first loser and second loser. Let's be honest, right? So therefore, as long as you're not the winner of the tournament, the game, the match, the race, you're a loser. Let's be honest. And your child has to deal with that. And that is an important experience because we want the child to fail. Remember, we cannot let them fail in their academic work. that is just too hard for all of us to accept, and probably be willing to let them do that. But I'm sure we're willing to let them fail a little bit in sport because it's of no consequence other than their ego at that moment. They will cry, they'll be disappointed, they might close the door and not talk to you for half a day. But that is the exposure we need to give them. It is just like the COVID-19 situation. You need to have a vaccine to teach your body to raise its defenses against the virus when it comes. So guess what? When we expose children to mini failures in the sports exposure and the sports experiences and the competitions they go for, those are the inoculation experiences that they are gaining. That makes a difference because these are in small doses, just a small jab. That's all we need. We're not going to overload them because they will die psychologically, right? We cannot do that. So what can you do? Small doses. How do you get small doses? Guess what? Start small, play different sports. They make mistakes. They go for competition. They will learn. And you need to encourage them. You need to encourage your kids when they fail, to support them and help them pick themselves up and rise up. And that will make that difference. So what is the mental toughness quality of your child? Now, again, many of your children might be a bit too young to be able to answer those questions. And therefore, you as a parent need to do this, okay? I'm going to keep this profile for 24 hours from now until the end of today, tomorrow. Well, this time tomorrow, so that, in case you have more than one child, right, you can do that for the rest of them, okay? So do this. So we're going to do this called the Mental Toughness Profile Junior, and it's based on research that are important. So everybody, take out your mobile phone. I'll give you a couple of moments and scan the QR code, which will give you to the link or the page, which is also, you can type it into your browser, bit.ly/mt-code, ly/mt-code. Give you a moment to do that, and I'm just going to play a little bit the music in the background. And if you are on the Facebook link section or comment section, please feel free to click on that link. And I'm going to move on to the next page. And you will see the access code there. Please enter the access code. And this code is specifically only for this event. And then you may want to read quickly the terms and conditions and click on the tick box. And then after that, move on to the next segment. And then you will come to the other page where you are asked to fill out your name. You do not, I repeat, you do not need to fill out your actual name. You can put an acronym, that's fine. We won't want to know. But we seek your help to put in the correct gender for your child, not for you. This is for your child, okay? And their age, right? And then the language, obviously, is English. If you wish to receive follow-ups and other information about our programs and our research, feel free to put in your email. Otherwise, it is not, I repeat, it is not compulsory. Okay, so please use the code. And once you do that, you will see this table, and please fill out the form. And then once you're done, you'll get to the questions. All right, I'll keep quiet for a moment. All right. Now, due to time, we'll need to move on, but this report, you will get the results immediately. Okay? You'll get results immediately. And I want to just do a quick debrief. When you see your report, your child's report, you will find the 5 C's, which are the qualities that are important, ranked, ordered, so that the highest scoring mental toughness qualities at the top. And then it goes all the way right down. So therefore, it's important to know that which are the qualities, maybe the bottom 3, that my child needs to work on. And if you find that any score around or below 50, that's something you want to look at. Okay? So that tells you that they're about halfway towards the maximum score. Now, again, we're not expecting everyone to be 100%. In fact, we don't see that happening even at the elite levels. We've done elite work or work with elite athletes, and we found that on average, highly successful people, on average, roughly about high 70s to about 80s. 90s and above means that mental toughness quality is too strong and too strong a strength can be a weakness. Make sense? So therefore, you don't want to be too high, but you want to be moderately high. So the ideal score will be around 70 plus, high 70s, so 75, 76 onwards. So typical of academic quality, but that's the normal distribution of it. Yeah. So 75 and above is good, up to about 80 plus. Right? 90 and above is too much. We have to be careful with that. Yeah? For example, if your confidence is 90, means to say you have a tendency to be overconfident. Yeah. And that can be detrimental because it might lead to cockiness and things like that. So high 70s, yeah, okay, is the target. So anything below 50 is an area for you to watch out for and find opportunities to expose your children to help them improve. All right, so with this, I want to also invite you to attend our next talk. We have another one later coming up at 11 o'clock where we will have a mental games competition. Yeah, it'll be fun and opportunities for you to compete against other attendees for today's session. All right, I want to thank you all for being a part of today's session. I'm just going to maybe allow myself to answer maybe 1 or 2 questions that some of you might have, and I'm going to seek my team's help in the background, Andrea and Alida, to support this. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'll be happy to respond to you in the next couple of minutes. So we have a couple of minutes left, about 4 to 5 minutes. Because after this, I have to change over before we start for the 11 one. Yeah. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type in the group chat. If not, I want to thank you all for attending today's session. And I hope you found what I presented to you scientifically, convincing enough for you. And also more importantly, that it gets you to start to think about what can I do for my child to prepare them for the world that it's going to be a VUCA world, right? And it's going to be tough and challenging for them. I need to prepare them for life. So my charge to you would be, and recommendation is to give them exposure to multiple sports, because that's a simple, not quick, but a simple but longer term approach, but definitely very effective because the research tells us so, and world-class athletes also are testimony of the multi-sports exposure. With that, I want to thank you all. Any questions, please feel free to continue to type in. We will respond via text, so that we don't want you to go away with just those questions and having them unanswered. With that, thank you so much, and God bless you all. Take care. Have a nice Sunday.